I'm Christian Datoc, reporting from the abandoned Biden convention here in Chicago. It's running opposite the DNC just down the street. And I'm joined by independent candidate for president, Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West, I appreciate the time. I want to ask you first and foremost, obviously you have your own presidential bid, but why is it important for abandoned Biden to be here, given it's a sort of crowning moment for Vice President Harris?
Well, you see, when you're talking about genocide, you're talking about ethnic cleansing, you're talking about apartheid, it goes far beyond politics. You're talking about something moral, you're talking about something spiritual. You're talking about what it means to be a decent human being, to be in solidarity with a precious people who are suffering in an undeserved manner, suffering in an unjustified, unwarranted manner. And so in that sense, it's just a matter of being witness, bearing witness, and being a witness, let me say. It would be true whether there was an election or not. It would be true whether there's a convention or not. We have to be organized. We have to be in solidarity with our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters and let them know we love them. We are in solidarity with them. We stand with them and will be faithful unto death. That's the kind of human beings we want to be, not just individually, but in community and in solidarity.
You've been a fan of Vice President Harris throughout her career. Do you believe that she might be more open to the positions, demands, requests, whatever you want to call it, of not only the abandoned Biden movement, but the pro-ceasefire protesters and activists across the country?
No, one, I've never been a fan of Sister Harris at all. I grew up in California. She was a top cop in California. She had various policies that criminalized a number of precious folk that I was always against in that regard. But she's been a centrist and a moderate in the Democratic Party, and I've always been a strong critic of any kind of policies that were criminalizing poor people, criminalizing mothers, and so on. And I think at the moment she might be using some language that generates a different tone, but there had to be a fundamental shift in policy. You know, you got to say, one, it is a genocide. Two, we're going to quit funding a genocide. We're going to end the occupation. We're going to treat Palestinians with dignity and come up with ways in which their self-determination can be manifest. I mean, that's the starting point of a serious conversation with me, very much so.
There is an argument to be made that if progressive voters do not vote for Harris, then former President Trump will likely win the election. Would you view his Israel-Palestine policies as better or worse than the current administration?
Oh no, man, Trump's a gangster. He's been a neo-fascist for a long time, and so there's no way that his policies would be in any way better than that of the militarists in the Democratic Party, even though they both in the end up with fascist effects on people in so many contexts. But no, I think in the end we just have to be truth tellers and justice seekers. And if they're not going to come to terms with mass incarceration, poverty, wealth inequality, and genocide, and both parties are wedded to those policies, then we have to come up with ways of generating alternatives. It's like in the 1850s, a choice between a liberal slaveholder and a conservative slaveholder. No, we're abolitionists, said Frederick Douglass. We want to abolish slavery. Well, you got to vote for one because of these strategies and tactics? No, we're going to fight to fundamentally transform slavery. You know, we don't want liberal versions of slave plantations versus conservative versions. In some ways, the Republican Party is a certain kind of plantation, and you see all of the overlords and the collaborators. And the Democratic Party is a kind of a plantation, too.
I want to ask you, because, again, you just sort of mentioned this Democratic plantation that the party is right now.
Yes.
Yourself, Jill Stein, I would even throw Robert Kennedy Jr. in this regard, people trying to upend the current system. Do you think the Harris campaign fears you as a political adversary?
And that includes Sister Claudia de Cruz and others. We have the socialist parties. There's a number of comrades out there doing some wonderful things. I think there's a certain fear. I mean, there's been an attempt for them to reach out to me.
About working in the administration, about backing your candidacy?
Absolutely.
Would you work in a Harris administration?
Oh, no.
Well, what better place to enact change on a system than from the inside?
You can't fundamentally change the system on the inside if you want something crucial like genocide. See, with genocide, you got to have a social movement on the outside that generate leaders who have a history of being anti-genocide. You can't have leaders who've been tied to genocide most of their career and act as if they're going to make a promise and then try to bring you in, and you get co-opted and you end up selling out, and they turn away from their promise, which they've done all the time. If they can't meet the promise of dealing with poverty and wealth inequality and mass incarceration, which makes us think that one isolated politician who's been tied to genocide all this time is going to do that. No, no, not at all. Not at all. Now, if you had a wave of new voices and figures who were trying to change the system, then that is a different thing. That is a different thing. But Harris is a tried and true Democratic Party loyalist.
To that point, do you think there are any lawmakers in government at the federal level now, be they independents or Democrats or Republicans, who are in that mold, committed to their ideals, trying to change the system from the inside?
Nobody I know of when it comes to genocide. Even my dear brother Bernie Sanders himself, he fails the test. He calls for ceasefire too late, strong critique of Netanyahu, still too late. But would he call for one, acknowledging genocide and acting as if it's a genocide will be brought to an end, not just a particular set of politicians in Israel. As long as he's tied to the very way in which the Israeli government conceives of its security, that means that Palestinian brothers and sisters are still crushed. It just becomes a liberal version of Zionism. And I can't think of one. Now, Sister Rashida would be one of the few. Sister Corey's gone. Yeah, exactly, yes. From Detroit. She would be one of the few when it comes to genocide. But even she, I would push her on a number of domestic issues, even though I'm a critical supporter of her.
Obviously, the protest movement is probably going to be the overriding story of this convention here in Chicago. It might be difficult to enact policy change, but what is a realistic short-term goal that you hope comes out of this week where thousands of people are gathering here in Chicago?
Well, I mean, one is that if you can't create revolution in a deep moral, political, and economic sense, then you create conflict and dissensus within the elites themselves. We saw this in Vietnam. So you bring the power and pressure to bear from below, and you create these fissures and forms of conflict with moral appeals, political pressure that can generate some policy change. But you could say you could change the policy and still reproduce the same corrupt system. We saw that with Vietnam. They had the Vietnam syndrome. We're not going to militarily invade. We're going to indirectly invade with military coups and so forth, you see. So that's just become strategic. But that's still a certain kind of victory, but it's just not what we want in the end. And that's why we hit the streets, that's why we tell the truth, and that's why we bear witness no matter what the context and no matter what the chances of immediate victory really are. Because when you love folk, you hate the fact they're being treated unjustly, and you do all that you can to support them. And those of us who have a deep love of Palestinians, it could be a love of Haitians, it could be a love of folks from Sierra Leone, from Ghana, from Congo, or south side of Chicago, or poor whites in Kentucky. We love poor people, we love working people. And we have to be able to tell the truth about their suffering, and we have to be in organizations that bring critique to bear that will fundamentally change the circumstances under which they live so that their dignity flowers and soars like an eagle.
Well, Dr. West, thank you for your time. To everyone at home, you can continue following along with our convention and protest coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.